What happens when you purposely shut down or severely disrupt the economy of the entire world and then you try to restart it again? Incredibly, none of our leaders seem to have asked this question before embarking on the largest economic experiment in the history of the world. But the answer is obvious. You do lasting damage that is difficult to predict and even more difficult to control. For the purposes of this segment, we're going to ignore the fact that our leaders did much more harm to world health with their response to the pandemic than the pandemic was ever going to do on its own. That's covered elsewhere on this channel. Today, we're going to concentrate specifically on the economic fallout. Now, most of us probably never heard of the term supply chain until the last few months. Well, we've heard plenty about it now. To simplify, the supply chain is a series of transactions that brings most of the products we buy from the raw material stage, like the cotton or chemicals or steel, required to make the product to the finished stage, that is, the actual product that arrives at our house in the Walmart box or whatever. In a normal economy, you occasionally do get crimps or bottlenecks in isolated parts of the supply chain, which can lead to supply and demand imbalances, meaning there's either too much or too little of something being produced. Starting around March of 2020, world leaders effectively shut down or severely disrupted every single element of the supply chain worldwide. The mines that produce iron ore to make steel, the companies that make mining equipment to extract the ore, the trucks that transport the iron to the steel mills, the workers who operate the mills. This was repeated in industry after industry until almost no supply chain in the world was left untouched. Naturally, production levels, and so supply, collapsed to the point where much less stuff was being made for a very long time. And at the same time, people were losing their jobs and being effectively locked in their houses, so their ability to buy things declined. Well, this means that demand fell at the same time that supply fell, and things remained roughly in balance. But when people began to emerge from their houses and return to economic normality, things began to go haywire. The supply chain is a very long and complicated instrument. You cannot turn it on and off like a light switch. When people returned to the marketplace with their pockets stuffed full of borrowed money, courtesy of the same leaders that shut down the world economy, stuff still was not being made at anywhere near the clip needed to keep things in balance. In other words, the supply of products is still low, even though demand for products is now high. When more money is chasing fewer products, prices go up. And they keep going up until supply and demand reach equilibrium. The chairman of the Federal Reserve and the de facto controller of the U.S. economy told us this past summer that inflation would be transitory and fleeting, and words to that effect. The chairman of the Federal Reserve is now saying, in essence, that they have absolutely no idea when inflation might abate because it is, quote, the result of supply-side bottlenecks over which we have no control. Here's the thing. If you define control as having a positive impact on the economy, you, Mr. Federal Reserve, never have control because it's your job to constantly distort the market and economy in ways that please your mentally challenged overlords. But I digress. Inflation is here to stay because our leaders in shutting down the economy have created lasting distortions in our markets that will take years to sort out. Workers are not returning, which means stuff is not being made, which means shortages, which means inflation. Countries are still shutting down in the middle of soaring demand, which means stuff is not being made, which means inflation. Governments are throwing gasoline on this dumpster fire by throwing money around like Donald Trump in a strip joint. This means less incentive to return to work, which means inflation. Vaccine mandates are causing workers to quit, which means fewer workers making stuff, which means inflation. And perhaps most worrisome of all, inflation, unlike many economic phenomena, is partially a state of mind. What I mean is that expectations of inflation tend to cause more inflation. Inflation expectations are now higher than they've been in decades and rising fast. In short, our leaders have squandered the improving economy, which was kindly delivered to them by the party president, and, as they tend to do, are hurting the people they are claiming to help through a stealth inflation tax, as well as diminishing long-term prospects for our economy. As in most things economic, the answers are easy, obvious, and statistically provable. But if you can't even stop and think about the consequences before you purposely blow up the economy of the entire world, what are the chances you're going to stop and think and make the hard choices now? Dear Mr. Biden, numbers don't care about your ideology. You can manipulate them for only so long until they come crashing down on you like a pile of bricks. Now, you may be okay with that, but the rest of us are not, especially when we will be stuck with the results long after you've gone on to wrestle with that big teleprompter in the sky. Joe, give us a break, okay? Stop channeling your inner Jimmy Carter and try to remember Joe Biden from Scranton, because if he was here today, we'd all be a lot better off.